Before we get started with this week's main topic, I want you to enjoy some unused and pretty much unedited footage that I was going to use last month and decided not to. But then when I looked at it again, I thought, you know what, this was some really fun footage and I think it would be neat to share with people. So I hope you enjoy it. Spoiler alert, there are barking dogs in it.
Go.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Royals at the Ranch for Thursday, July 21st, 2021. I'm Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary, and this is Boba Fett, also of Spirit Keeper Animal Sanctuary. We're out here with Lucy cooling off. It's been in the 90s Fahrenheit all week, and Boba Fett has actually got to come outside several evenings this week because it's so hot inside the house that I think he's enjoying some time outside where it's only in the 80s. Are you all set?
Wait a minute.
Are you filming? So this week, since Fett has got to come outside with me several evenings, just because it feels so good to be outdoors once the sun has set, he's got to experience wind and he's got to experience a little bit of increased humidity because we got some really, really puny rain showers tonight. I mean, nothing much to speak of, but enough that you can tell it's a little bit more humid in the air than our normal Colorado dry weather. And he seems relatively comfortable and relaxed out here. He hasn't had any big major breakdowns. He hasn't really balled up or tried to hide. He's tongue flicking, and that's been the case every night this week that I brought him outside. Now this is actually the first time I brought him out to the barn. I've just been walking out the door and standing on our porch with him. But he is quite the trooper. He's curious, and he is just such a really neat snake. Very pleased with him, and he came from Bad Reptiles. Fett really did seem to enjoy his trips with me outside. In fact, a few nights after I filmed this, I had left the front door open to let some cooler air in the house, and I found him outside crawling along the ground just off of our front porch right next to one of the dogs. He looked perfectly comfortable and relaxed. He was all stretched out and tongue flicking like it was the most normal thing in the world for him to be out there. Hi everyone, and welcome to Royals at the Ranch for Thursday, August 4th, 2022. Several weeks ago, I did a class for Royals at the Ranch on desensitization to your presence and proximity. In other words, getting your snakes used to you being in the room, being present, and then getting closer and closer to them. If you haven't watched that video, you need to watch that. Here's the thumbnail, and I'll of course link it in the description. But you need to watch this because next week, if everything goes well, I'm going to air part 2. I've been working on it. It's almost ready. It just wasn't quite ready for this week. And that's because I'm putting a lot of video examples in it to really demonstrate to you where your snake should be at before you introduce touch and handling, which is what part 2 is going to be about. Just to review, this is what gradual desensitization is, and I will of course review this again next week. But it's gradually, in other words, very slowly over a long period of time, exposing the snake to a stimulus that is distressing or scaring it. That's usually us or another large mammal. It might even be living in a new environment or living in a household when it's come from a breeding facility. But you introduce that scary stimulus at a level below the threshold at which the snake is fearful or beginning to experience and display distress, and then backing off. So in other words, as soon as you reach the threshold where the snake looks scared or worried or they freeze, then you need to back off until they show behavior that's comfortable and relaxed again, or you need to remove this scary thing or make sure that the snake can move away from the scary thing. The snake must be able to always get away from the aversive stimulus at any time it chooses. So this isn't forcing the snake to be exposed to the scary thing, even if that's you. They always need to be able to opt out and get away from it. If they can't, you need to be ready to take that thing away immediately, even if that's you. And over time, you work up to a point where the fear and distress threshold is higher and higher until the snake is no longer bothered by the formally aversive stimulus. So that thing they were afraid of before or worried about before, or they perceived as a threat or potential threat, which usually is us, now they're no longer bothered by that thing. So in part 1, I detailed how to use approach and retreat to gradually desensitize snakes to presence and proximity. So if you look at photo 1 here, initially they're afraid of you and they're retreating and hiding when you're in the room. But then through approach and retreat and gradual desensitization, you work up to the snake being comfortable and relaxed and remaining visible when you're in the room. And then the next step, and again, we went over this all in part 1, is you get closer to them now, you get closer to their habitat, and they're retreating or hiding when you get close to their enclosure. And through approach and retreat, gradual desensitization, you work up to the point where they are staying out, visible and active when you're very close or right next to the enclosure, and they're just going about their normal daily activities or nightly activities with you right there, and they're not worried about you at all. So if you think that you and your snake are ready to move on from here, the next steps are what we're going to go over in part 2, which is introducing touch and introducing handling. But first, honestly, objectively, and accurately evaluate where you and your snake are in the approach and retreat process, in this gradual desensitization process. If your snake hides, escapes, avoids, strikes, or hisses, you need to back off. You can't move on to any more steps. If your snake remains visible with you nearby, then hopefully you've already moved on to increasing activity around your snake, maybe even opening their door. And if they're remaining visible with you nearby and you're opening their door and they're coming out of their enclosure, like you see in this picture on the lower left, then it's time to consider introducing touch and handling. Considerate touch and handling, not just grabbing them. So if you are at this point and you're ready to do this, next week's video is going to tell you where you should go next. Before we start, just like with gradual desensitization to presence and proximity, we're going to be using approach and retreat while working on introducing touch and handling. So please make sure you're familiar with that approach and retreat process from part 1. Remember that if the snake remains comfortable and relaxed with what's happening, continue carefully. Don't get over exuberant and all excited and go overboard and scare your snake. If the snake freezes or retreats, then we freeze and retreat until the snake displays comfort and relaxation again, and then we approach again. So this is a gradual, considerate process, and your snake will let you know when they're ready to move on.